In chase, unless you are sent out on a definite mission, protecting photographic machines or avions de bombardment, you are absolutely on your own. Your job is to patrol the lines. If a man is built that way, he can loaf on the job. He need never have a fight. At 200 kilometers an hour, it won't take him very long to get out of danger. He stays out his 2 hours and comes in with some framed-up tale to account for his disappearance. Got lost, went off by himself into Germany, had motor trouble, gun jammed, and went back to arm it. He may even spray a few bullets towards Germany and call it a combat. Oh, he can find plenty of excuses, and he can get away with them. That's spreading it, Dunham. What about Houston? Is he getting away with it? Now, don't let's get personal. Very likely Houston can't help it. Anyway, it is a matter of temperament mostly. Temperament, hell! There's Van, for example. I happen to know that he has to take himself by his bootlaces every time he crosses into Germany. But he sticks it. He has never played a yellow trick. I hand it to him for puck above every other man in the squadron. What about Talbot and Barry? Lord, they haven't any nerves. It's no job for them to do their work well. This conversation continued until the rest of the journey. The life of a military pilot offers exceptional opportunities for research in the matter of personal bravery. Dunham and Miller agreed that it is a varying quality. Sometimes one is really without fear. At others, only a sense of shame prevents one from making a very sad display. Houston is no worse than some of the rest of us. Only he hasn't a sense of shame. Well, he has the courage to be a coward, and that is more than you have, son, or I either. Our fellow pilots of the Lafayette Corps were lounging outside the barracks on our arrival. They gave us a welcome which did much to remove our feelings of strangeness, but we knew that they were only mildly interested in the news from the schools, and were glad when they let us drop into the background of conversation. By a happy chance, mention was made of a recent newspaper article of some of the exploits of the Escadrille, written evidently by a very imaginative journalist, and from this the talk passed to the reputation of the squadron in America, and the almost fabulous deeds credited to it by some newspaper correspondents. One pilot said that he had kept record of the number of German machines actually reported as having been brought down by members of the Corps. I don't remember the number he gave, but it was an astonishing total. The daily average was so high that, granting it to be correct, America might safely have abandoned her far-reaching aerial program long before her first pursuit squadron could be ready for service. The last of the Imperial German air fleet would, to quote from the article, have crashed in smoldering ruin on the war-devastated plains of northern France. In this connection I can't forbear quoting from another, one of the brightest pages in the journalistic history of the legendary Escadrille Lafayette. It is an account of a sortie said to have taken place on the receipt of news of America's declaration of war. "Uncle Sam is with us, boys. Come on, let's get those fellows." These were the stirring words of Captain George Tenault, the valiant leader of the Escadrille Lafayette, upon the morning when news was received that the United States of America had declared war upon rulers of Potsdam. For the first time in history the stars and stripes of Old Glory were flung to the breeze over the camp in France of American fighting men. Inspired by the sight and spurred to instant action by the ringing call of the French captain, this band of aviators from the USA sprang into their trim little biplanes. There was a deafening roar of motors, and soon the last airman had disappeared in the smoky haze which hung over the distant battle lines. We cannot follow them on that journey. We cannot see them as they mount higher and higher into the morning sky on their way to meet their prey, but we may await their return. We may watch them as they descend to their flying field, dropping down to earth one by one. We may learn then of their adventures on that flight of death, of how far back of the German line they encountered a formidable battle squadron of the enemy, vastly superior to their own numbers. Heedless of the risk, they swooped down upon their foe. Lieutenant A was attacked by 4 enemy planes at the same time, One he sent hurtling to the ground 15,000 feet below. He caused a second to retire disabled. Sergeant B accounted for another in a running fight which lasted for more than a quarter of an hour. Adjutant C, although his biplane was riddled with bullets, succeeded by a clever ruse in decoying two pursuers bent on his destruction to the vicinity of a cloud, where several of his comrades were lying in wait for further victims. A moment later both Germans were seen to fall earthward, spinning like leaves in that last terrible dive of death. These boys are Yankee aviators. They form the vanguard of America's aerial forces. We need thousands of others just like them, etc. Stories of this kind have, without doubt, a certain imaginative appeal. J.B. and I had often read them, never wholly credulous, of course, but with feelings of uneasiness. Discounting them by more than half, we still had serious doubts of our ability to measure up to the standards set by our fellow Americans who had preceded us on active service. We were in part reassured during our first afternoon at the front. If these men were the demons on wings of the newspapers, they took great pains to give us a different impression. Many of the questions which had long been accumulating in our minds got themselves answered during the next few days. While we were waiting for machines, we knew, in a general way, what the nature of our work would be. We knew that the Escadrille Lafayette was one of 4 pursuit squadrons occupying hangars on the same field, and that, together, these formed what is called a groupe de combat, with a definite sector of front to cover. We had been told that combat pilots are the police of the air, whose duty it is to patrol the lines, harass the enemy, attacking whenever possible, thus giving protection to their own corps d'armées aircraft, which are only incidentally fighting machines. In their work of reconnaissance, photography, artillery direction, and the like. But we did not know how this general theory of combat is given practical application. When I think of the depth of our ignorance, to be filled in day by day with a little additional experience, of our self-confidence despite warnings, of our willingness to leave so much for our Godfather Chance to decide, it is with feelings nearly akin to awe we awaited our first patrol, almost ready to believe that it would be our first victorious combat. We had no realization of the conditions under which aerial battles are fought. Given good will, average ability, and the opportunity, we believed that the results must be decisive, one way or the other. Much of our enforced leisure was spent at the bureau of the group, where the pilots gathered after each sortie to make out the reports. There we heard accounts of exciting combats, of victories, and narrow escapes, which sounded like impossible fictions. A few of them may have been, but not many. They were told simply, briefly, as a part of the day's work, by men who no longer thought of their adventures as being either very remarkable or very interesting. What I thought will seem interesting or remarkable to them after the war, after such a life as this. Once an American gave me a hint. I'm going to apply for a job as attendant in a natural history museum. Only a few minutes before, these men had been taking part in aerial battles, attacking infantry in trenches, or enemy transport on roads 15 or 20 kilometers away. And while they were talking of these things, the drone of motors overhead announced the departure of other patrols to battle lines, which were only 5 minutes distant by the route of the air. For when weather permitted, there was an interlapping series of patrols flying over the sector from daylight till dark. The number of these and the number of avions in each patrol varied as circumstances demanded. On one wall of the bureau hung a large-scale map of the sector, which we examined square by square, with that delight which only the study of maps can give. Trench systems, both French and German, were outlined upon it in minute detail. It contained other features of a very interesting nature. On another wall there was a yet larger map, made of aeroplane photographs taken at a uniform altitude, so pieced together that the whole was a complete picture of our sector of front.